Hi everyone, thanks for joining me again on GBN Originals. It's Neil Oliver here. Today I have two guests to talk about the COVID dossier, which has been compiled by Sasha Latypova and Debbie Lerman. Sasha is a former pharmaceutical and medical device research and development exec turned whistleblower, and Debbie Lerman is an investigative researcher and writer. They've come up with this incredible document, I would say. It's published today. So thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
This to me is an amazing piece of work. If I can quote from near the top, COVID was not a public health event, although it was presented as such to the world's population. It was a global operation coordinated through public-private intelligence and military alliances, and invoking laws designed for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons attacks. Now, that is quite a statement. Can you talk me through the process which led you to this conclusion? And I'll allow you to decide for yourselves who should lead off and who shall follow on.
Yeah, well, go ahead, Debbie.
Okay. I started researching what happened during the pandemic in 2021, 2022, because I had, from the beginning, none of it made sense to me. And I started researching the pandemic planning documents of the United States government because I wanted to see whether what happened in real life, the lockdowns, the masks, the social distancing, and then the vaccines and the vaccine mandates, whether that was all part of a public health plan or whether that was something else, because it did not feel like a public health plan to me. And so I looked and I found historical documents going back years that were two streams of planning. One was the pandemic planning, or actually it was just responses to disease outbreaks for public health. And the other one was biodefense, which I didn't really know anything about. And biodefense is the plans that governments have, and there are also many international alliances for this, to respond to a weapon of mass destruction attack. In particular, for biodefense, it's bioterrorism and biowarfare. And that's when somebody releases a pathogen with the intent of killing a lot of people, and that it's not a naturally occurring outbreak. And so what I saw was that the response that we were carrying out in the United States, I started just with the United States, was actually a response. It was a biodefense plan. It was not a public health plan. And so I freaked out. Because I think that if it was a disease, it should be managed by public health. And if it was managed by something else, then something else was going on. And so I found the planning document, which is the United States government's COVID pandemic response plan. And that is a document that is not available anywhere on any government site. So already that tells you something. It's the government's response plan, but it's not available anywhere. I found it because I was doing deep research on the internet, and it was on a New York Times server where it had been leaked to them for a certain article that they wrote. And I saw inside that plan that what was supposed to be a public health response legally, so in the United States, the Department of Health and Human Services is supposed to be the lead federal agency for responses to disease outbreaks. However, in this document, the HHS was superseded by the government's task force. And at the time, the task force was being led by the National Security Council. The National Security Council is the body that is supposed to advise the United States president on military and intelligence affairs. And so that's who was in charge of our pandemic response. That led to a cascade of discoveries about people who were involved, about agencies that were involved, and then seeing that it was a parallel response in so many other countries, and that it was coordinated. That was really where the story kind of blew my mind.
Sasha, to bring you in, why were we told it was one thing? We were all invited to think it was a health emergency, that it was being looked after and supervised by, chief medical officers, by physicians, all sorts of people involved in health. Why were we told it was that, when it would seem that in reality it was a response being coordinated by the military? Why was it a bait and switch?
I think it was evidence of governments lying, in my opinion. So I asked myself that question also. I first believed, like everybody else, that this was a health event. When the actions of the government stopped making sense to me, I also began investigating into this. And eventually, so Debbie's article, we got in touch and met over this. And I did my own investigation. I'm from pharma industry background. And so what they were doing made no sense to me as far as health, public health. All these nonsensical measures which were making things much worse than if it was genuinely a health response. And then also remember, we were all, including you probably, we were all censored and banned on social media for even questioning that this was some sort of a zoonotically evolved virus. Immediately everybody would be shut down and say, no, it's real virus from a bat, from the Wuhan lab, from Wuhan market. And now, apparently it's okay to discuss it as a bioengineered virus, although that's also a second layer of lies. Because again, this is evidence of lying. They prepared several layers of lies because they know one will become untenable at some point and they will need the second one. And the second one, that this is a biological developed weapon.
And I'm going to jump in, Sasha, because I think we might differ here. I don't know what it was. And I think the point that we're making in the dossier is that it doesn't matter,
it doesn't matter
what the trigger was. So the fact that everybody's focused on whether it was from a pangolin or a raccoon dog or the Wuhan lab it's not beside the point. It's an interesting question, but it is not what destroyed the world. What destroyed the world was the lockdowns and the vaccine mandates. That's what destroyed the world.
Exactly.
And so what we're asking people to do is refocus. What was the origin, not of the virus? What was the origin of the response?
Exactly.
Because the origin of the response is what destroyed the world.
Yes, over the years, my position has evolved. I woke up in 2020, I suppose, and I've spent the last 4 years listening to as many people as possible. And where the point at which I have arrived is that whatever COVID was, whether it was something that happened between a pangolin and a bat that met in a bar and had too many drinks, or whether it was something that was cooked up in a lab and released deliberately or accidentally, is interesting but beside the point. What matters to me is what they did with it.
Yeah, exactly.
What they used, the thing they called COVID,
yes,
to then do.
Yes.
That's what troubles me. And the statistics to this day still declare that this, whatever it was, there was no excess dying until 2021 and after the rollout of the things they called vaccines. And the toll was taken on people who were average age 82, 83, which is beyond life expectancy. And in most cases, they had comorbidities. So whatever it was, it was killing the ill elderly. If indeed it was something new at all. But why were we placed under military coordinated controls in the face of whatever it was that was largely non-lethal?
Right. So again, in this dossier, we try to step back from giving our own interpretations, although in interview I'm happy to do so. But we just want to point out that people who are using the dossier will see this is dry facts only and references only. So we try to remove personal interpretation as much as possible and just say they used what was designed for CBRN, which is chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction response. Never told public about it, lied about it, which is evidenced by their action and by how they were lying about viruses, known viruses, biological weapons. So they have massive amounts of lies, massive amounts of censorship, which was driven centrally from intelligence agencies. And people need to realize this has nothing to do with health at all. Now, why they were doing this, you can speculate, and my personal view is that this is for population control, global population control, and as you know, they're also not hiding this, the Agenda 2030, the establishment of global government. So I think those goals and those plans existed for quite some time. And this was supposed to be the final push for establishment of those, of that new world order, new global government. And health, it happens to be a really, really good mechanism for controlling people. It's a really good mechanism to scare people, like they did here with some imagined story, and then push all these nonsensical measures which are primarily designed to control, like lockdowns, masking, vaccine passports that they wanted in every country, which is now being probably replaced with digital ID. And so they're still trying that, the digital ID, the biometrics, the surveillance. So that's still ongoing. And that was the first implementation of it, because through health, you can convince masses of people to voluntarily submit their freedom. And then whoever is running this operation has perfect beginning to establish all this control.
And I'll jump in here because Sasha and I agree on all of the global control issues. And I think the important thing to realize here is that there is, so for me, it's more structural than and systemic than that they were trying to use COVID to kill people. Because I think if they were trying to use COVID to kill people, it didn't do that great a job, or the vaccines, or the so-called, whatever the mRNA technology. I don't think it did a good enough job for that to be the justification. It might have been. I'm open to that interpretation. In my opinion, the global structures that have been put in place and that have been growing and growing and growing, especially since 9/11 and since the fall of communism, which is these supranational corporate public-private partnerships that are really pretty much controlling everything right now in the world, because national governments don't have too much power anymore. And the one that is in charge of military biodefense, so responding to biological whatever, is huge. It's an enormous international global conglomerate that includes pharmaceutical companies, global pharmaceutical companies, and all their subsidiaries. So just think about how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people already are just employed in that. Then we have all the academic institutions and the journals and the governmental agencies that are in charge of those things. And it becomes a too big to fail entity. That's how I think of it. It's a too big to fail entity. And so if there is no outbreak and there is no biowarfare or bioterrorism, something has to happen to justify their existence. Sasha, go ahead.
Yeah, right. So the evidence of this consortium also we're including in the just the tip of the iceberg, really, in the dossier itself. So I received at some point a couple of years ago, I received anonymously a whistleblower tape from an internal meeting of AstraZeneca executives. So the meeting, it was a larger meeting, but the recording is about 6 minutes from two people talking, Pascal Soro, who is the AstraZeneca CEO, and Mark Esser, who is VP for monoclonal antibodies. And they both kind of recount the success so-called from the 2020 when they were developing vaccines and biologics for COVID. And specifically, Mark Esser says that, this is part of the consortium that was established in 2017 when we were approached by DARPA, which is a U.S. Department of Defense Advanced Research and Development Agency. And so DARPA, specifically Colonel Matt Hepburn, which we've included in our dossier, approached numerous pharmaceutical companies. This consortium contains hundreds of companies. AstraZeneca was approached in 2017 so Mark Esser says, interestingly, when the DoD asked him to participate in this, he said, I thought it was science fiction because as a experienced pharmaceutical research and development professional, he knows it's science fiction. They were being asked to develop vaccines and drugs in response to novel viruses that DoD will identify for them in 60 days or less. And so he said it's science fiction because it is science fiction. You can't do that. But somehow they were convinced by money and decided that that's okay. And were working on this until 2020, when he also says that on February 4th, 2020, that's why we're publishing it here, DoD called them, the entire consortium, and told them to switch to COVID products now. So at that time, on February 4th,
because
because COVID was declared a national security threat. So on February 4th, there are no cases, practically no cases, no deaths in the world. US government DOD somehow decides it's a national security threat. Calls pharma, they themselves call, no, there's no presidential action, nothing. DOD goes directly to the pharmaceutical consortium and says, you guys switch to COVID, money is coming. And that's it, the rest is history. So from then on, we also see that all these militaries execute the same plan in all these countries that we've tracked.
Yes.
Because within the, I mean, it's definitely, I mean, I was very shocked by so much of it, but the fact that all of this was happening simultaneously in, according to the dossier, the United States of America, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Australia, Canada, the Netherlands, Germany, and Italy.
Yeah.
That they were all
and those are only the countries that we know about.
Yeah, there are many more. Anecdotally, I know that many more countries did the same exact.
My attention to this was drawn a few months ago, a couple of months ago now, and I had content on this channel then. The Dutch Health Minister, Fleur Agema, testified, if that's the right word, in her own parliament, that as far as she was concerned, there had been a coup d'etat. That the control, the decision-making processes were taken from taken away from the Parliament of the Netherlands, and the overarching control was coming from NATO, and it was her use of coup d'état.
Now I'm gonna correct you
head.
though. Actually, it wasn't. She did not say coup d'état. She actually. So I've talked to the researcher who said it was a coup d'état and who brought all of this forward. He has actually contributed to our dossier. She did not say coup d'etat.
Okay.
She is the health minister of the Netherlands, and she was actually reporting within the framework of the government in a stance that seemed to the public, and it might have been or it might not have been supportive of the government's response. So all she said was that we had to fulfill our NATO obligations. And that our intelligence agency was running it. That's all she said. She did not say coup d'etat. So I just want to make sure the record is correct. The coup d'etat is the interpretation of the researchers who brought all of this forward. But now, she was very much against the COVID measures when she was not the health minister. That was several years ago. But when she became the health minister, she stopped criticizing them. And so the researchers that I have talked to, they don't know whether right now she's just trying to send us some messages, covertly or sort of surreptitiously so that we can get those messages and actually appear to be supporting the Dutch government's response, because that's what she's doing. Right.
But there's no denying, is there, that the decision-making process was assumed by by national security, referring to NATO, and that effectively the response to whatever it was being coordinated not by the Dutch Parliament but by NATO and the Dutch security services.
Yes. I was just correcting the record,
absolutely.
To make sure.
No, I'm glad that you did so. But I mean, to me, that's a coup d'état in all but name. That's that's the assumption of the control and the coordination of the process being taken out of Parliament, which is the people's hands, and placed in the hands of NATO.
Right. And so Italy too. Italy, we just got the information about Italy from contact in Italy. In many different countries, researchers have been desperately trying to get access to documents. I am actually involved in a 2-year ongoing FOIA battle with the government, trying to get the documents that are behind the government's COVID response plan, but they are supposedly National Security Council. You can't FOIA the National Security Council. So other countries have managed to FOIA planning documents of their governments. So the Dutch researchers were able to FOIA a lot of excellent documents that showed exactly what you said, that it was an intelligence takeover and that it was a coup. In Italy, they also FOIA'd a lot of documents. And in fact, there was a committee in Italy created on February 5th. Okay, so this, and again, the coordination is incredible. So the day after, somebody from the DOD called the pharmaceutical companies and told them that it's a national security threat before there was any deaths or any illness at all. And before the public was told, I really want to emphasize that recording that Sasha has should have been front page news everywhere, because the pharmaceutical companies were being told by the military that there is a national security threat, and nobody in the public was made aware of this. So if they knew and they thought that it was a public security threat and we weren't told about it, that's an enormous scandal right there. Just that. And so in Italy, the same thing happened. So on the 5th of February, they established a special scientific commission within the government that was now responsible for responding to the national security threat posed by the coronavirus.